Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And we are going to talk today about a brand new book. It is called The Silver Star. It's a novel, and the author is someone you may have heard of. Her name is Jeannette Walls. Our book is published by our friends at Scribner's, and I welcome you to the program.
Great to be here.
You have an accomplishment that I have never seen before and never had on the program. It says in the publisher's notes that you're beginning your what year on the Times bestseller list?
It's the seventh year.
The seventh year,
yeah.
She says modestly. Yeah. Most authors have 6 years. No, that's incredible, and it's for a memoir.
It was a memoir, and
the title of the memoir,
The Glass Castle. And
so if you haven't bought that, go out and buy it now. What's the matter with you? The Glass Castle. Mm-hmm. It's a memoir,
and it's a shock to me. I did not expect it to resonate. I pinch myself every day. It's a little surreal to me.
It must have shocked everybody.
Yeah.
Did anybody pass out in the dead faint at Scribner? Really, really amazing.
Thank you.
And then you went on from there to write a novel, and the novel's title, if I can find it here, is With Half-Broke Horses.
Yeah, it actually started out as nonfiction. It's a story about my grandmother. It originally started about my mother, and I wanted it as told to sort of a biography. And it was she who convinced me that it should be about her mother. And since I couldn't interview my grandmother, who's been dead for more than 40 years, I just ended up calling it a novel, even though it's as close to the truth as I could get it based on these interviews.
Closer to a biography than,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sort of more of an oral history, but there's just so many gaps I had to fill in and assumptions that I made. And it's told in first person by somebody who's dead for a long time. So I called it fiction.
And now we have a book that should be called fiction.
Yes.
Because it's a novel.
Because I made it up.
Oh, and it is called Silver Star.
Yes.
And it's a it's hard for me to sum it up as to what it is. As I was reading it, at some point, I said, like, hey, this is a YA book. But it's not. What it is a singular accomplishment, in my opinion, of a novelist, you, being able to speak to us, an audience, with a kind of a mindset of two young girls. Well, and I think that's quite an achievement. And it's never phony. It's never forced. It just flows beautifully.
Thank you so much for saying that, because that was exactly what I was trying to do, is deal with these adult topics through the eyes of a 12-year-old. And yes, it does feel like, in some ways, like it's sort of a kid's book, but it's really not. It deals with some pretty tough issues about race and molestation and bullying and parenting and abandonment.
Violence.
Yes. But through the eyes of an innocent to naive 12-year-old who really believes that right makes right and that right is wrong and wrong is wrong, and that there's not, she doesn't understand the ambiguities of the world yet.
And doesn't want to.
Bingo, she doesn't want to.
She's very happy, I think, with her worldview.
She was happy being a kid, and by the end of the book, she's not so much a kid, but she's still sort of bullheadedly trying to be optimistic.
Now, how long has the book been out?
It came out on June 11. So
not so long ago.
Not long ago, no.
No, and the critics are already jumping up and down. The Cleveland Plain Dealer writes that Jeannette Walls, once again, proves that the combination of gifted storytelling with great stories is both rare and intoxicating. I don't know about the rare, but it isn't intoxicating.
Well,
I think that person has to read more, maybe. I don't know. I'm moved and flattered, but I don't really think of myself as an author or just a storyteller. I just enjoy telling stories. And that's fine.
There's something I wanted to say about parenting and kids.
Telling stories is primordial.
Yes, it is.
And people who do it well are good folks. That's all there is to it. And it doesn't have to be some, highfalutin, intrigue-filled kind of thing.
And I'm less interested in complex sentence structure. Not to knock those who do that, but this is not a complicated book in its structure, in its thoughts, and in what it's dealing with. I hope that it is. But the language is very simple.
Yeah, in terms of what one might call style, is very direct, and it keeps coming at you just as a young child would.
There you go.
I mean, kids don't hold back. Either they're right at you with the message, or they're saying nothing.
And that's why I wanted to write it. From the protagonist's name is Bean, and she's just a straight shooter. She doesn't think things over too much. It's just things are what they are.
And that gets the reader angry from time to time.
Oh, yeah.
But then, wow, come on, go girl, go. And it says here that you write with easy assurance about Liz and Bean, proving in fiction, as she did in her memoir, The Glass Castle, that she knows the children's hearts as well as the evil that can lurk in the hearts of grown-up. And that is very accurate. You do get the heart, beyond all the childish kind of stuff. We're talking about the hearts of these two young kids. And it's very moving, I think.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
When we come back, I want to look more carefully at the lead characters and one of my favorite characters, who's not quite the lead.
No.
Stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
The Silver Star, it's a novel. It's by Jeannette Walls and is published by Scribner's, and we're talking about it today here on Conversations on the Coast. And, before we get to the two young main characters, I'd like you to read a small piece from the book, which in its opening sentence mentions another character. Would you please?
I'd be delighted.
Thanks.
Thank you. The next morning, Uncle Tinsley found the bike Mom rode as a kid. It was in the equipment shed, where he also found his old bike, but it needed a new tire, so Liz and I decided to ride double. Mom's bike was a terrific Schwinn like they didn't make anymore, Uncle Tinsley said. It had a heavy red frame, fat tires, reflectors on the wheels, a speedometer, a horn, and a chrome rack behind the seat. Uncle Tinsley wiped it down, pumped air in the tires, oiled the chain, and drew us a map of the part of town where the Wyatts lived, explaining that it was known as the Mill Hill, or just the Hill. With Liz pedaling and me sitting behind her on the chrome rack, we set off for the hill. The day was hot and sticky, the air hazy, and the rack dug into my behind. But along the way, we rode through cool stretches of woods where the branches of these big old trees reached out all the way across the road to create a sort of canopy, and you felt like you were going through a tunnel with patches of sunlight occasionally flickering between the leaves.
I love it. I love the cool woods and the branches forming a canopy. And you don't take a lot of words to set that scene, but you do it very, very well. Now, at the very beginning of what you read, you mentioned my favorite minor character,
Uncle Tinsley.
Uncle Tinsley. Tell us about Uncle Tinsley. And Uncle Tinsley lives in a small town in Virginia.
That's right. And it used to be he was a member of the big family in town. The mill, the cotton mill, that was the single industry of the town, was owned by him and his family. And it has fallen on hard times. And he's somebody who clings to the past a little, this ideal world he used to live in.
He clutches it.
Yes, he clutches it, in fact.
Yeah.
And longs for the day when he was and his family was so important. But it's not just his family's power, but just when things were a little bit more civilized. He's the sort of person who really doesn't like the direction the world is going.
And one of the other things he doesn't like is the direction that Charlotte, who's his sister, her life has taken. And yet, when the kids fall on his doorstep because Mom has driven off to make it big in showbiz.
Find herself.
Yeah. He essentially welcomes them.
After some initial hesitation, he is so set in his ways, and he's a little thrown. He's somebody who's really retreated into his own life. But these girls just show up on his doorstep, and he readjusts his life to try to accommodate them.
He certainly did. I mean, come on. He found a burying place
for their pet turtle that died.
and said a eulogy over the turtle's body. You can't get much more cooperative than that.
And I think more importantly, because their mother was so unstable, he gave them some stability and some roots in this community and a sense of family that they'd never had, whereas their mother had run from family and found it a sort of threatening and oppressive force. He represents some security that they'd never experienced before.
What's great about your writing of that character in comparisons with the other one, all those good things we say about him, he's still a little weird.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, his interests are strange and all-consuming.
He's a hoarder, among other things. But he's also sort of a bit of a, if not a racist, certainly a classist. He's somebody who remembers the South the way it used to be. And wishes that it still were. And he also, having been a member of the family that was the most prominent family in town, he's a snob, even though he's fallen on really hard times. And he doesn't want his nieces going out and getting a job. He thinks that is below them, even though they're barely getting by.
And Liz, who's 15 of the two girls, she very much understands that they're just getting by and decides that they have to go out and get work. Now, she has a kind of artistic bent to her. She's fantastically good at word games, and she appreciates poetry and writes it. And she is not as lost as Bean seems to be.
Liz, you see this so often with families where the parents are not present. The children take over and they become adult-like. And very often it's the oldest child who takes on the role of a parent so that the younger sibling or siblings can have a childhood. And that's something that Liz has done here. She has matured way beyond her years.
And one of the things that happens in the story is that Bean, much to her credit, I think, defers time and time again to the older sister.
And again, it's something I've seen so many times, that the older sister's in charge and just takes on this parent role. And you just assume that the older sister, because she knows a little bit more than you as a younger sibling, the younger siblings assume that the older sibling knows everything. And it becomes a surrogate parent.
It's amazing. It's really, really amazing. Now, there's a discovery made here early in the book. Bean finds out who her father is.
Which was very important to her because her mother and Liz have a very tight relationship. They're a lot alike, but Bean doesn't feel that she's very much like her mother. So discovering her father in this town where she sort of finds her roots, it's something that is very significant to her. And he is so different from her mother that it answers a lot of questions for her.
Sure does. It sure does, yeah. You know, the Silver Star looks at all aspects of life, all the stuff that comes along in life, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the ugly. And proof of this wide scope when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Jeannette Walls is our guest today. She's talking about her new book, her third book, her perhaps second novel, depending upon how you think of her second book. The title of this book is The Silver Star, and the publisher is Scribner. And our friends at Publishers Weekly got going here in terms of a comparison To Kill a Mockingbird. And I'm going to share that because some of you out there are literary and will understand this. I must confess, I'm not so sure I understand this. But Publishers Weekly says, in part, Wallace understands in her bones how growing up with a mentally ill parent can give children extraordinary skills and resilience. And we've been talking about that. But also leave them without any sense of the boundary between ordinary behavior and abuse. When Bean reads To Kill a Mockingbird in school, she seems like a long-lost cousin to Scout and to the young Walls herself. Well, she makes for a strong, and I love this word, spunky protagonist. I like spunk.
I do too.
I think that's good. And focus for a moment, if you will, or could we please focus for a moment on a couple of instances of what PW calls ordinary behavior and abuse.
Well, for example, Charlotte just walking out on her daughters. It's something that Liz and Bean were used to because it happened a lot.
It's a strange thing that we can sit here and say that a parent walking out on the kids these days is ordinary.
If you grow up with that sort of thing, though, it seems normal. People's view of normality is shaped by by their experiences, and Charlotte is a very unstable woman. She's the sort of person who she needs a parent in her life herself, and a lot of the things that she has subjected these kids to is just it's unreasonable. But they don't know that. Particularly Bean. Liz has shielded Bean from some of the worst of it. And, so often when these older children take on that parent role, it's an incredible training ground because they're then able to go on and become these CEOs. But sometimes it's too much that these kids shouldn't have to take on these roles, shouldn't be covering up their parents' misdeeds or trying to make their younger siblings feel better about things.
An example of outside, at least as I read the book, is after a fight between Bean and somebody called Lisa Saunders at school. Bean is punished, taken to the principal's office. Looked like she was winning the fight, in my opinion. And she's punished for, quote, unseemly language in the vice principal's office. And that is so much, it is a very good example of what's wrong in disciplining kids in school or anywhere else.
I couldn't agree with you more. Bean is a scrapper, and she fights for what she believes in. And when she was told, what you were fighting about doesn't matter, you're not supposed to fight, and she wasn't going to accept that, and she spoke back to the principal, standing up for what she believed in, and that got her in trouble. And I've seen this happen time and time again, and that's one of the things that inspired me to write this book is what do you do when people who are supposed to be in a position of authority violate that authority, or they seem undeserving of the authority that they have over you? Are you supposed to just take it on the chin, or do you fight back? And there's no simple answer, because if you fight back, there's going to be some damage done. But if you don't fight back, you become a victim.
There's a character in your book who almost everything he does, particularly in relation to these two girls, is outside the bounds.
But he's
It's good old Jerome Maddox. What a devil.
But he's, I think, very typical in manipulators and bullies, in that one of the things that he does is he strips these kids, and strips other people as well, of their sense of self. He tests people, and he does it with Bean a couple of times to see if she's the sort of person who stands up for herself. And one time he pushes her a little too far, and Bean goes to her older sister, who she always thought was so wise, and says, what do I do in this situation? And Liz, thinking that she's an adult, but really not having a good understanding of what adults might do in that situation, advises her to accommodate him.
And this is the moment where one says the real parent's presence is sorely needed.
Exactly.
Kids need that. Being a parent, sticking to it, is one of the most important things in the world.
Exactly. And this story is about one of the consequences when kids do have to take on these adult roles. And because these girls are hiding the fact that they're working for Jerry Maddox from Uncle Tinsley, they get in way over their heads.
Toward the end of the book, you get serious about an animal. Now, I don't know why you get serious about this animal, but you do. It's the wonderful emu.
Yes.
Emu.
Yes.
And the older of the two girls really falls in love with emus.
Yes.
And she writes a poem. May I?
Yes.
Emus do peruse the news, sometimes alone, sometimes in twos. But ask what they think, emus just blink. Emus rarely share their views. They don't refuse. They use a ruse, pretending to be quite confused. And when I first read that, I said, oh, why the heck is that in there? My interpretation of it is it tells us that finally that young woman-to-be has found some peace. After all,
yes.
She's,
Liz becomes very troubled by the end of the book, and one of the ways she's survived is to fixate on other needy creatures, first Bean, and when she realized she couldn't take care of Bean, she fixates on the emus, and she feels a real kinship with them because she's always dreamed of flying herself, and here are these useless birds who can't fly. So she fixates on them, and yes, has found a certain amount of peace there.
Well, they can't fly, but they sure they evade very well. I mean, one of the scenes in the book, there's a cowboy on a horse with a lariat, and he's done all kinds of stuff, and he can't get the emu.
Those emus.
I loved it.
I think Liz envies that a little bit.
This is a very fine book. I don't know how many weeks it's going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, and I don't really care because I had the privilege and the pleasure of reading it perhaps early on in a very long career. The title of the book is The Silver Star. The author has been with us, Jeannette Walls. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.